Welcome back. This is Isaac, and you're watching ACT Reading Prep. Now, so far, we've been looking at the prose fiction parts of the passages, or prose fiction passages, and I'm hoping that you are somehow figuring out the pattern and how to connect the dots in between the paragraphs of these prose fiction passages, and that you know how to incorporate them into solving the questions without reading the entire passage. Of course, that's possible because the questions themselves, they're not really deeply rooted into the passage, but rather they only ask most obvious questions, and so you would be able to answer them by reading only the important parts of the passage, right? Now, we have been looking into the prose fiction, and this is our last prose fiction lecture. And I'm hoping that you really did get something out of this, so that when you're reading that prose fiction, it will be easier now, and you would pick out the answers in a faster manner. Because after all, the problem with the reading passages is that you don't have enough time. And even if you did solve all the questions, you don't have enough time to go back to some of the questions that you felt a little bit shady on, right? Go over it again and try to answer those questions. And so what we're trying to do here is to minimize the time that that is required to solve the questions, all right? So we'll try to cut that time down towards, say, at least 7 minutes, or at least, 6 minutes, so that you rest of about 4 or 5 minutes, you could use them to look back into some of the questions that you thought you're not so sure about, or some of the questions that you feel like you need to go back to and to try to read again. And that's what we're going to try to do. All right. So let's take a look at the last prose fiction passage and try to get it over with. All right. Today we're going to take a look at pages 748, 749. If you have the book, please open them up and let's get started. Now, passage 1, of course, again, it's very important for you to read this part of the passage, right? So we'll read that right away. This passage is adapted from the novel Winter Wheat by Mildred Walker back in 1944, right? And the setting is in the northern prairies of Montana in 1940, right? So if you're given this information, what you really have to do is to think about the world then, 1940s, right? What was happening around the world in 1940s? Now, 1940s was a wartime. War was happening around the world, that is, right? But of course, particularly U.S. was not in the war in 1940. 1940 was when U.S. was just getting out of the Depression, maybe, right? Because the Great Depression started back in 1929, and it lasted about 10 years or more, right? 10 years or more. And it was the war that brought them back, or brought the U.S. back to its feet, economically speaking, right? So therefore, 1940s, U.S. was seeing a lot of progress, right? There were a lot of things that were going on in U.S. There was something called the Federal One Project. I'm not so sure if you're aware of it, but this project was ran by Roosevelt, I think, President Roosevelt, and this program was to make sure that Americans would have a job. And it wasn't just about a job, but it was about keeping, or at least keeping the heritage, culturally speaking, heritage of arts and arts and culture, and they were trying to keep this, trying to preserve this, right? And so therefore, that was going on back in 1940s. On the other parts of the world, Japan was invading many other countries around the eastern and the Southeast Asia, and the war was reaching at its peak. Okay. 1940s saw a lot of atrocities of war around the world, but U.S. was relatively safer than many of the other countries, and therefore you can probably think of this time as 1940s in America, especially in Montana, as one of those years, or one of those periods where people were sort of enjoying a peaceful times. But of course, I wouldn't say as peaceful as right now, but peaceful than the other parts of the world, right? So therefore, this was setting in Montana, northern prairies of Montana in the 1940s. And the title tells us it's winter wheat. Now, one thing to be sure is that it's type of wheat. I don't want you to know what it looks like per se, but it's not really important unless you're going into a wheat business or any other agricultural businesses. But I just want you to know that winter wheat is one type of the wheat, okay? Just to distinguish winter wheat is grown sometime during September. So it could be planted in September, and it could be harvested later on sometime in spring. Okay, and there's something called spring wheat as well. Spring wheat is, of course, it's grown sometime during the spring, and then it was harvested just before the summer. Okay, so remember what it is like, or what they are actually. And winter wheat is it's not the most common wheat right now because of gluten-free. If you remember, I mean, if you are already aware of, I mean, especially the ladies and the girls, there was last year or 2 years ago, gluten-free diet has become very popular in US, and it also had become popular in Korea as well, right? And so therefore, what you really need to look into would be is winter wheat. So what does that mean, and what kind of a symbolism does it have? So if you go deep into it, right, if you're that literary person, you can go deep into it and saying, because it's grown sometime during the winter, it overcomes all the harsh weather, like the frozen soil. I mean, all the different, all the difficult, environment or situations, and it perseveres, and then you bear fruit sometime during the spring. And so I guess what winter wheat could tell you is that there will be a lot of hardships during life, but then after all, you will, come up with something better, right? Something good. So I guess that's something, or that's the underlying theme of the winter wheat. All right. So anyways, let's go right into the passage and see what the actual excerpt from the passage is telling us about. Now, of course, the first part of the paragraph, or first part of the passage, the first paragraph, is always considered an introduction. And of course, it's not an introduction in a real sense, but because we're given these excerpts only, or this part of the passage only, what we can just think about is that the first paragraph will become our reference point. So what we will read is the first paragraph, or first sentence of the paragraph, as well as the last sentence of the paragraph. Okay? So let's read that. September is like a quiet day after a whole week of wind. So remember, September is when winter wheat is planted. Okay, so therefore, what we're looking at is the September. It's just before the winter wheat is actually planted, or at least they're trying to plant it, right? So therefore, is a quiet day after a whole week of wind. So I don't know what to make of it, but I guess the writer is saying that it's like September is when everything starts to begin, because it's the whole week of wind, and then it's a quiet day after, meaning it's when we are going to start, or it's when the actual planting starts, right? Kind of gives you this setting or the mood that September is somehow hopeful, than September being a, say, dreadful, or September being a pessimistic month, right? It's an optimistic month, because after a whole week of wind, you actually get a quiet day, right? So that's one of the mood or the tone of the passage that you're getting. Let's move on to the next. The fields have a tired, peaceful look, the way I imagine a mother feels when she's had her baby and it's just lying there thinking about it and feeling pleased. Now remember, wheat is, in reality, well, I can't be really sure, but in Asia, right, because the staple food for Asians is rice. Rice is, as you know it's grown sometime in the spring, so it's planted in spring, March. It's germinated in March, and then it's actually planted sometime in May, and then it's grown until June, July, August, right? And it's harvested sometime in September. So it's harvested sometime in September. So meaning that after the rice has been grown, there is another plant that's been grown, right? Or that's another plant that has to be grown on the ground, because what the ground needs. I mean, if you are a little bit aware of the agriculture, I'm not an expert on this, but I know a little bit about this. What happens to the ground is that ground needs to be like refurnished again, because rice or any other crop or any other staple or the primary crops would take up all the nutrients. They'll take up a lot of elements within the soil, and if you leave it as it is, the ground will not gain any nutrients back, right? So therefore, what you need to do is you need to plant something that will give back its vitality to the soil, and one of the plant is this wheat. wheat is planted so that the ground would be rich in nitrogen again, right? The nitrogen fixation, that is. I mean, nitrogen is a part of a fertilizer, right? So therefore, for the ground to be more fertile or fertile again, you need to plant this wheat, all right? So that's what wheat was. But of course, in U.S., wheat is a little bit more of a staple because U.S. we eat bread for staple food, right? I mean, bread is like a staple food for us, and so therefore, not for us. I'm not currently in U.S., but that's what the wheat is for. So therefore, what this is saying is that the field has a tired, peaceful look. So meaning, after the harvest of whatever the crop that was primarily planted, now it's time for us to plant the wheat, right? Winter wheat for that. So therefore, what she's saying, or at least, another interpretation could be that winter wheat is not always planted sometime in September, but it could be planted sometime in May. It could be planted in many other say months of the time. All right, it could be March, it could be May, but it could be September, it could be July also, right? But I mean, we're not so sure by just reading this. So I mean, one thing for sure is that the harvest is over, so there's nothing on the field. Harvest is over, and the field is empty, and that's why it's peaceful look. It has a peaceful look, the way I imagine a mother feels when she had her baby, and of course just lying there thinking about it and being pleased. All right, so that's the state of the field, or that's what the field looks like right now. So the whole thing kind of gives us this whole idea of September being a very peaceful and optimistic, hopeful month, right, for everybody. Because whether the harvest is done or whether they're trying to plant the tree or plant the wheat right now, it's either way a very hopeful month. So that's the mood of the story that we're given. All right, so that's understood. Let's move on to the second paragraph. The first sentence, it says, it was hot, though, like a flashback to July. So again, it was hot, meaning September was still hot. Well, I don't really, because of the 1940s, I couldn't really say that September was hot, but at least today, at least present day, September could be hot, as in July, because of the global warming and how the weather is changing, climate is changing. So therefore, she's saying that it was hot, or whoever this person is, the writer or the main character says it was hot, though like a flashback to July. So it's peaceful, but it was still hot. So it's kind of giving transitions to the next idea or next content that she's trying to reveal to you. So again, it's very peaceful, it's very hopeful and whatever, but it's still hot, meaning, I mean, hot could be associated with something positive, but of course, sometimes it could be associated with a negative environment, a negative situation. So therefore, it's hot, right? The rest of it, we're not going to read it because it's not so really important right now. Moving on to the third. The house was so quiet, I could hear Mom calling the turkeys down by the barn. So obviously they grow turkey, right? And Mom was calling the turkeys down the barn. And the house was so quiet. That still gives us the mood, right? Okay, moving on to the next. When I've got something, I take care of it, she always said. So she here, I bet it's the mother, right? And the mother is saying something like, when I've got something, I take care of it. It tells you what kind of character her mother is. Her mother's character is very much of a responsible person. If she has something to take care of, she will take care of it. She will do it, right? If she has a responsibility, she will do that. So you can think of her as a very strong-willed person, very strong-willed person, right? So that's another thing that we can get off of this dialogue. And the next paragraph says, I washed some cucumbers while I was waiting. So again, this is a very mundane thing. She was just washing the cucumbers, right? It's probably this person washing the cucumbers, 1940s. I'm pretty sure this is a girl, and so she's just washing the cucumbers, maybe helping her mother, right? So that kind of tells us that she is of an age, right? Maybe she's 15, 16, maybe 17, and some bracket, some kind of bracket within the teenage bracket, right? Okay. Next one would be this one, and then it began. I don't know what began, but something began. So it's a transition again. Something began. Something was peaceful, right? Something was very peaceful until here, but something began. All right, moving on. Here is your grain market broadcast for today, spring and winter, ... up to. So I guess they're listening to something because it says broadcast, right? So I mean, think about 1940s. TV was yet a popular, or not yet been really commercialized. There was maybe a TV, but it wasn't really commercialized at all. So this was probably steel belted radio. You know, one of those big radios that you can probably see in the old movies, right? So there were probably something broadcasting of the grain market came out that, right? And then it says, I could add 2 to yesterday's price, so I didn't have to hear anymore, but I listened out of habit and because I love to hear it. So therefore, whoever this person character is, the character was listening to this broadcast yesterday, probably the day before, and probably tomorrow she will listen to it anyways, because I guess this is a very important part of the day, right? Listening to this broadcast. Because, I mean, from here you can probably think of this as, because it's a grain market broadcast, I guess they grow wheat, right? They grow some kind of a crop, but wheat, I'm pretty sure, because the title of the story was winter wheat. And so therefore they grow wheat, right? And of course spring and winter kind of gives up that wheat thing, right? And then she's listening to it and it's up 2, so it's probably up 2 cents, right? It's up 2 cents from the yesterday's price, okay? And of course she didn't have to listen to it anymore, but she loved to listen to it, meaning it became a habit. She just listens to it, right? And then it says, one heavy dark northern spring, 52. We'll just read up to that, but that's another dialogue, so we'll read one more. The words came so fast they seemed to roll downhill, right? So downhill, so meaning that because it's a grain market broadcast, they go real fast and they just tell you what the price of the crops are, right? So that's what she's saying. So she's probably listening very intently to the broadcast. And then here it says, one dark hard winner, 53. Okay, so again, these different prices maybe are very important. That's why they continue to come up within the dialogue. Next, it's just winter wheat to the people who raise it. Only to me, it means more than that. So I guess they raise winter wheat. And for her, it's the meaning was quite different. Because for other people, according to that line, other people, it's just winter wheat, right? Winter wheat is another just crop that people grow so that they can make flour out of it, right? Gluten-heavy flour out of it, and they could, make something off of it, right? Winter wheat is usually used to, they are usually used to make flour, but gluten heavy flour, so they could be used to make noodles. They could be used for baking, right? It's not a soft flour, but it's still a mixture of the spring and the wheat flours can make up a baking flour or a flour that's suitable for baking. Anyways, that's what other people think, but for her, it has a different meaning. That's what she says. And then, durum, flax, and rye, up 1. The broadcast ran on. Right? So the broadcast is continuing. Now, durum, flax, and rye are all types of wheats. Durum wheats, or the rye wheat, or the flax wheat. They're just different types of wheat, right? So therefore, that's something that you should know, or if you don't, then that's fine too. Wheat's up, I told her. She told her mother that the wheat was up. The price of the wheat was up, right? By 2 cents, that is. Mom nodded, so mom understood this, right? She wasn't thrilled to hear that the wheat price was up. She just nodded, right? And then I look more like Dad, and all of a sudden she says, I look more like Dad. So when she says she looks more like Dad, is the facial features and probably the physical features, probably she looks like her dad. Now remember, if you remember your genetics, of course, I mean, it's not really, I wouldn't say this is, but it is almost true. The firstborn child, who is a girl, there's a higher possibility that she would look like her dad, all right, rather than her mom, because I guess it's a genetics thing, right? So anyways, so she looks more like her dad, all right, good. And then Dad clicked off the radio and came out to the kitchen. So now the radio is off, the broadcast is off. And then it says, we'll read this as well because it's a dialogue. Well, we'll go over and tell Bailey we are going to sell. So definitely Dad says something about selling. And then 53 is good enough. Come on, Ellen, you can drive me over. So I guess Ellen is it's a person's name. I don't know if that's the main character. I don't think that's the mother, because you wouldn't call your wife. Well, it's a possibility that you can call your wife by name, but in 1940s, especially in Montana, I mean, there is that stereotype. you wouldn't call your wife the name of your wife, but you would call her by something else, right? So anyways, the next would be, I took off my apron and was running across to the barn for the pickup before Dad had taken his hat from behind the door. So therefore, definitely this Ellen is the name of this character, right? And she took off her apron. She's of the age. She's helping her mother cooking, right? And so therefore, she's running now to the pickup so that she could drive Dad to Bailey's, all right? And then it says, glory, it was hot. It was hot. Glory, it was hot. So being hot, of course, whatever it was, the hotness of it now suddenly turns into a glory, something that was very good, right? I mean, the character says glory, not just because it was hot glory, but I don't think she's afraid of the winter, but it was glorious for her because I guess from the flow of the story, they are now deciding to sell the wheat, right? And that means more earning for the family. And so therefore, that's why she probably says it's glory, it was hot, right? I mean, you don't have to read the entire thing to know that. So, anyways, that's the story, and that was the end of our paragraph, or that's the end of our passage, right? So, again, if you sort of like review the passage, this family, whichever family, or this family, I don't know the last name of the family, but Ellen's family, they grow wheat, especially winter wheat, and Ellen is having just another one of those normal days, listening to the radio broadcast of the grain market, and she tells her mother that the grain or the wheat they are growing is up, and Mom's probably nodding to understand. But then Dad comes in and says, "We're going to sell the wheat, right?" And of course, 53 cents is pretty good, and so Ellen is excited sort of because Dad says to go drive me to Bailey's, and she takes off her apron and drives him there. And then the last passage or last paragraph says that it's glorious. Glory, it was hot, right? So she's happy now that something is being sold, all right? So again, that's the story. Now, let's move on to the questions and see if we can answer some of the questions off of whatever we just read, okay? Of course, we will be required to go into the different parts of the passages to answer the questions nonetheless, all right? So let's take a look at the first question and see. The point of view from which the passage is told is best described as that of the young woman, right? So again, the point of view, the writer is, or at least the character, the main character, is a young woman, but what is she like, right? So, is unsure whether she would like to attend college in the fall, but is aware that she will have the options. Now, we haven't read anything about the college yet, but maybe it could be an answer, but let's leave it there. But if you look at it, you have college here, you have college here, you have college here. Now you can connect the dots. Okay, every answer choices have college in them. So I guess Ellen, she's of an age to go to the school or to go to college, right? She's pretty much excited because if they sell wheat, they get to have the money and maybe she could go to college. Maybe that could pay for her tuition. Maybe that's the idea, right? That's why it says she's unsure whether she would like to attend college in the fall, but is aware that she will have the option. Or has made plans to go to college in the fall, but is now convinced that the high cost to attend will prevent her from going. Or is it had assumed that she would go to college in the fall, but is now considering working on the family ranch for a year instead? Or is anxiously anticipating attending college in the fall, but is aware of the conditions that could affect her plans? Now, let's try to eliminate which one of these would most likely be your answer. Now, it's attending colleges, expecting to attend the colleges. Colleges would be about the same, but it's the latter part of that sentence. In the fall, but is aware that she will have the option. So she will have the option of what? We're not so sure. We'll just give it one bar. How about 2? Had made plans to go to college in the fall, but is now convinced that the high cost to attend will prevent her from going. I don't think that's the idea because she probably knows the cost of attending college, and it's not whether the high cost is the problem, but it's the problem of their family earning the money, right? Therefore, we'll just get this out of the way. Had assumed that she would go to college in the fall, but is now considering working on the family ranch for a year instead. I don't think that's the case because I don't think her working in the family ranch was one of the options. I think she was more of, or she was more just because, how the story goes, she is more interested in going to college, not just working for a ranch or working for a family in the ranch. I don't think she'll be working for her family, but she's just, staying in her family. 1940s, you probably realize that working was just part of the family. So therefore, we'll just give it 1 bar. And then is anxiously anticipating attending college in the fall, but is now aware of the conditions that could affect her plans. Now, the conditions probably will give it 2 bars, because if you think about the conditions, right? The conditions here meaning if you don't earn a lot of money, or if you don't have money, right, you can't go to college. And so there is this condition of whether I guess if you connect the dots, is whether you sell the wheat. If you can sell the wheat, then you can probably go to college. But if you don't, or if the wheat prices come down, then you might not be able to sell it, right? That's the idea. So let's go back to the passage and see if we can find this idea, right? We'll probably find it somewhere in here, or in here, in the first or the second idea, right? So if you look at it, it says, real wind that blows dirt in your eyes, the harvesting is done, blah, blah, blah. If you shop through it, or if you look through it, there's much of her saying that she needs to attend the colleges. It was hot though, like flashback to July, I wasn't there, there's stuff, fire, everything was speak, blah, 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 room princes come, we have to sell our wheat this month and not hold it over. That is, we did if I was going to the university. So here is the idea. We had to sell our wheat this month and not hold it over. That is, we did if I was going to the university that fall. It might go higher along toward Christmas, but we couldn't wait for that, right? So again, that's what she's saying. If she were to go to college in fall, she would have to sell it now, or we have to sell it this month. We have to sell the wheat this month. But, they have to wait until Christmas to see whether the price would go up. But she's saying that would be too late, right? So here you get the idea. Now, which one of the answer choices is your answer? Definitely the one that we gave 2 bar, because this is not it. No, she's aware that she will have the options of what, right? What kind of options are we talking about? So definitely that's off, right? Again, these 1 bars like this one, I had assumed that she would go to college in the fall, but not considering working. Not really. I think she's really wanting to go to college, because that's what she said. She wanted to go to fall. She wanted to go to university in the fall. And if they have to wait until Christmas to sell it, then she can. And that's not a possibility. And so therefore, the answer has to be D. She's anxiously anticipating to attend college in the fall, but is aware of the conditions that could affect her plans, right? Of course, her plans would be going to college this fall or going to college next spring. Either way, right? What would be the problem? The problem is whether to sell the wheat this month or hold it over until Christmas to sell it, right? Okay, simple as that. The answer is D, right? Next, number 2, the passage most strongly suggests that the narrator's family grows what? Right? Narrator's family grows what? So if you think about it, is it wheat only and rye, wheat and rye only, or wheat, rye, and durum only, or wheat, rye, durum, and flax? It's obvious question, right? I told you that all of these are types of wheats. And for this to be a real answer, I think they will have to say winter wheat, right? Because there is a certain thing called winter wheat, and there's something called the spring wheat. And so therefore, wheat only, right? That would be the only answer. Because these are all other wheats as well, but we're not so sure if they grow all these, right? But only wheat, right? So the answer has to be only wheat. Definitely, right? Because it says 53. Okay, just to give you confirmation of why it's wheat, right? Just to give you confirmation why it's wheat. And it says 53 is good enough, he says. Father says 53 is good enough. 53 is, of course, 53 cents is good enough, right? So if you take a look at the audios that's come, or at least the dialogues that's coming in, right? So let's take a look at that audio and let's see where it goes. So it says here, from here, right? So here is your grain market, and says, I could add 2 to yesterday's prices, blah, blah, blah. 1 heavy dark northern spring, 52. And then it says 1 dark hard winter, 53, right? 1 dark hard winter, whatever, was 53, right? And then, of course, when I've got, and then, of course, it says something like durum, flax, rye, up 1, right? So wheat's up, she says. So definitely we can't see which wheat, right? But wheat definitely. Not durum, not flax, and not rye, because we don't know what prices they were, because it says up 1 from yesterday's. The only thing that was possible was this one. Here it says 1 dark, hard, winter, what? 53, right? That's why that says 53 is good enough. So therefore, we're talking about the wheat, all right? So the answer has to be wheat only, all right? Next, moving on to number 3. The passage does not mention which of the following as something that at least one member of the family monitors carefully. So this is just one of those detailed questions. You'll have to find the details, right? So is it the turkeys, or is it the land disputes in Gotham? Is it how water is used, or is it wheat price fluctuations? Now, there are 2 things that you can get rid of, eliminate here as being not of an answer, right? Remember that turkeys appeared wherever you read that part, right? When mother was actually calling the turkeys into the barn. So therefore, mother is looking into the turkeys, or monitoring the turkeys. So definitely that's out of the question. So A is not your answer. How about D, wheat prices fluctuation? This is definitely not an answer, because Ellen, our main character, is listening to this, right? So therefore, monitors this, no. Now it's B and C, right? B and C, now we need to choose the answers from B and C. So what we need to do here is to find the details, or at least the keywords in this case. So we'll find the keywords here as in Gotham and land disputes for B, of course. And for C, we're gonna find water usage, okay? So we'll skim through it and see where we can find Gotham and water usage. Now let's go back to the very first page, right? And we'll just skim through it and to see whether we can find these words. So if you skim through it, right? If you skim through it, you find the word Gotham here, right? So we'll read that part. It says, the voice of the man who announced the wheat prices is as familiar to me as Dad's. It's different from anybody's voice around Gotham. More like one of those city voices that broadcast the war newses. That voice touches us here and all the ranches spread out over the prairies between the Rockies and the Mississippi. It touches all of the people in Clark City, 30 miles from here, who live on the ranchers, even though they try to forget it. So therefore, nothing about Gotham land disputes, right? So therefore, Gotham is definitely, could be, most possibly our answer, right? Okay, next would be water issues. Let's find water and water usage, right? So go back, or let's try to find it here and there, right? Blah, 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 blah. You can't really find it, but we need to read that very front pages or front again, right? So try to find it, skim through it, and then it says this is the washing part of it, right? So let's take a look at that. I washed some cucumbers while I was waiting. They were bright green and shiny in the water. I used to play with they were alligators when I was a child. Then I fenced them, as in she stopped them in with my hand and poured off the water into the kettle on the stove. When you have to carry every drop of water you use half a mile, right? You don't throw away any. Therefore, she's saying that it's very hard to get water because she's living in a prairie ranch, and in order for her to get the water, she would have to walk half a mile to get the water, and therefore she stopped playing with water. So therefore, definitely water usage is out of the question, right? So your answer has to be the land disputes in Gotham. Nobody is really taking care of this, or nobody is thinking of this at least, so your answer has to be B, right? Simple. So again, when you see that word not, right? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find the keywords, okay? And try to find them within the passages by skimming through. But it will be easy because you probably have read that first part of the paragraph, or first sentence of the paragraph. Therefore, you know what each and every paragraph should hold, right? Okay, I'm hoping that you do. Let's move on to the next. Number 4. The narrator describes her mom as having all of the following except for this one, right? Except for this. So, facial features that differ from those of the narrator's dad, a strength that the narrator identifies with, or is it a noticeable sense of worry over the current year's wheat prices, or is it a commitment to caring for her belongings? All right, so we'll try to derive our answers. Look at J. a commitment to caring for her belongings. Is she committed to her belongings or to her responsibility? Yes, because we read that part where she says something about what? Where she says here, I will take care of, or she says something like here, when I've got something, I take care of it. She's a very responsible person, so therefore, she does have a strong commitment towards her belongings. So therefore, definitely, this is out of your answer, right? Because that's except for one, right? Next one would be noticeable sense of worry over the current year's wheat prices. Now, does she show a noticeable worry over? When Ellen tells her mother that wheat is up, the mother just nods, right? A nodding doesn't really tell us that she's worried about things. So let's put 2 bars over here because this could be our possible answer. A strength that narrator identifies with. Let's see if there's something like that or any other things like facial features and the strength, right? We know where that's located, right? We know where that's located. Why? Because we already know that this is located somewhere in the later passages because that's what we read. I look more like Dad, right? That's the facial feature part of it, so therefore we read this. He's tall and thin and has light hair and blue eyes, and his face shows what he thinks or feels. I'm strong like Mom, though I like working in the fields better than in the house. So therefore, she's strong like Mom. I don't think that's physical strength like Mom, right? Because Ellen says she likes to work in the field than in the house. Which work do you think is harder, right? Which work do you think requires more energy? I bet it's the field work. And so therefore, I don't think it's the strength part of it, but I think it's like strong like Mom is in Mom being a very strong-willed person, right? Okay, therefore, we got that. Let's take a look at another one of those here. Wheat's up, I told her. Mom nodded. She stood there untying her bandana, and I watched her as though I didn't know her face better than my own. It says, Mom's is a quiet face with a broader forehead than mine and dark brows, an eye, and a wide mouth. She doesn't show in her face what she thinks or feels. That's why people in Gotham thinks she's hard to know. But when she laughs, the laughter goes deeper down in her eyes than anybody's I know. So therefore, Mom just nodding, and she doesn't really show much of the worries because she's that kind of person, right? So we kind of got our answer already. Let's take a look at that. So a strength that the narrator identifies with, definitely out of the question. So it's the F or H, right? F or H, because facial features that differ from those of the narrator's dad, definitely, right? I mean, because she says that she looks like her dad, and just previous passage says, or previous paragraph says, that she doesn't have her face. She doesn't have Mom's face, because Mom's face is more broader forehead and blah blah blah. It's very different from her dad's. And she says she looks more like her dad. And so therefore, facial features that differ, those of the narrator's dad, definitely, right? So which one is the answer? The 2, of course. The answer has to be H, a noticeable sense of worry over the current wheat prices. Definitely not, because Ellen describes her as being difficult to read. People in Gotham have a difficult time in reading what she thinks or what kind of person she is, right? But if you think about it, but Ellen says, but if you look at her closely, you probably know that she's the most sweet person because her laughter shows it all, right? So therefore, definitely the answer has to be H. You see how the answer comes about, right? By reading only the necessary parts. All right, so let's move on to the next and see if we can continue to do this. 5. As it is used the first time in line 34, the word it most precisely refers to. So we'll go to line 34 and find the word it. Okay, let's see what kind of word it refers to. So if you go to lines 34, so we'll just erase it so that you can see it better. Sorry, excuse me. So we'll erase this to see a little better on 34. There we go. All right. Okay, so here, lines 34, starts from here, I'm sorry. So it says, and then it began. I knew before Dad turned it up. So here it says it, right? Line 34, and there's another it here, right? So what do we mean by it here, right? So the first it, then it began. I guess when you say then it began, because right after it, what begins would be grain market broadcast. And so therefore, I would say the it here is the broadcast, right? And then the word it here, I knew before that turned it up. What do you turn it up? Turn it up here is I have to say it's the volume, right? You turn up the volume, you don't turn up the radio, or you can turn up the radio, so I would put both radio and volume, right? Okay, so this is the it, right? It's precisely it. So which one is it, right? So let's take a look at that. So which is it in this case? So is it the radio? Or is it one of the city voices that broadcast the world news? Or is it the narrator's dad's voice? Or is it the noon broadcast the wheat prices? So you have two answers here, right? It doesn't mean that you have two answers here. You have two possible answers. This is not it, and this is not it. It's either the radio or it's either the broadcast, right? But if you think about it, then it began, right? That's the idea. Then it began. Radio cannot begin. Of course, you can turn it on, but radio doesn't begin. But broadcast begins, right? And also, you turn it up. You can turn both radio up, right? The volume, of course. Or you can turn up the actual broadcast and turn up the volume of the broadcast. And so in that sense, I would say the answer has to be D, right? Definitely, because you can't really begin a radio, but broadcast begins, all right? So therefore, definitely D is your answer. You get the idea, right? How to solve the questions. We didn't even go back to the passage, but we solved the questions by remembering, right? Remembering what we read. Moving on to the next. Number 6. The narrator's statement in lines 75 and 78 most nearly means that she believes her mom is. So what kind of person is her mom? So 75 to 78, again, we'll read that part. All right, 75 to 78. So 75 and 78 is located right here. Let me erase some of the parts so that you can read it better. Right? But the thing is, we've already read this part, so it will give us an easy time. So here, from here, 75, right? So 75 to 78, we'll read that part. Sorry. We'll read this part, 75 to 78. So we'll read it from here. She doesn't show in her face what she thinks or feels. That's why people in Gotham think she's hard to know. But when she laughs, the laughter goes deeper down in her eyes than anybody's I know, right? So you get this idea. So what do we mean by this, or what does she think of her mom being, right? So she thinks that other people think that mom is hard to understand, or it's hard to know what she's thinking. But she says, but when she laughs, the laughter is deeper than anybody's she knows. So that's the idea, right? Okay, let's go on ahead and see what that means then. Is it that somewhat moody person? She's saying that her mother is somewhat moody person? Or is she saying she's an expressive person? Or she's saying she's a serious person, or she's saying she's a warm person, right? So you need to know that. Now, somewhat moody person. I don't think she's moody, because when you say moody, it means you have a mood fluctuation. Well, at a time you're happy and then you're depressed. Happy and depressed, right? So therefore, definitely not. An expressive person, I don't think so, because it says that people don't know what she's thinking. So she's not expressing herself enough. So therefore, no. A serious person who rarely interacts with most of the people of Gotham. Now, I don't think so, because she does, I think, interact with people. That's why people don't know how to read her, or people do not know what she's thinking, right? Because if she didn't talk with anybody, or rarely have anything to talk with people, then she wouldn't, or all the other people wouldn't say that, right? Definitely not. How about a warm person? She's a warm person who is not well understood by people in Gotham. It kind of gives you the answer right there, right? She's a warm person because everybody else thinks that she's a cold person. You can't really read her, but she says that her laughter, right, it's deeper than anybody else's that she knows. So therefore, a warm person who's not well understood by people in Gotham because other people don't know her, right? Or other people don't understand her. So therefore, definitely the answer is J. Simple as that, right? We read that part, and that part gives us another answer in number 6. So that kind of gives us, right? Moving on. Number 7. As it is used in line 2, the word real most nearly means. So this is what we call a vocab question, all right? Now, in ACT, you would rarely see a vocab question, especially in reading passages. You would see probably 2 or 3 of them with the entire 4 passages, and so don't worry about them too much. And it's not like the SATs. SATs will test you on, extracurricular vocabulary, something that you don't even, use later on. But ACTs will give you vocab. Unlike the SATs, that it's simple vocab, right? Simple enough so that you know what it would mean, right? So therefore, we have the words. So line 2, real. Let's go back to it and see what it means. We probably have read that part, but since it's been quite some time, we'll have to read that part again. So line 2, September is like a quiet day after a whole week of wind. I mean real wind that blows dirt in your eyes, right? The real wind. So what are we talking about? The real wind. Real wind that blows dirt in your eyes, meaning the real, for real, right? For real wind. All right, so let's go to that vocab question and see what that real is supposed to be. So is it factual wind? Or is it positive wind? Or is it established wind? Or is it powerful wind? Now, factual wind just doesn't make sense, so let's cross it out. Positive wind, a real wind? I don't think so. Established wind? I mean, wind establishes itself and blows gently? No, I don't think so. So therefore, it has to be powerful wind, right? The real wind that does blow dirt in your eyes, right? So the answer has to be powerful wind, right? Simple as that. The answer is powerful. So the word real becomes powerful, and this is what we call vocab question. Remember, I told you that there will be 1 or 3 in 4 passages. Not that many, and it's going to be very easy, right? Okay, moving on to the next question, number 8. Which of the following does the narrator not directly identify as a threat to the wheat crop? Now, we haven't read this part, the threat part of it, right? But I guess what you can do, because this is what we are finding, grasshoppers, winds, and hail, and drought, we'll find those within the passages and see if they are threats to the wheat crops or not, right? Simple as that. So let's find grasshoppers, wind, hail, and drought. It will be simple. So let's try to go back to the passage. Of course, this is what you would do when you get to, right? The real test, you'll do the same thing. You'll have to find grasshopper or anything that was mentioned in the answer choices, right? All right, so we'll read from the very first paragraph and see if that's there, all right? Skim through. Ooh, blah, 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 blah. Up, there's hail, there's drought, and there's grasshoppers, right? So we'll read that part. It says, the harvesting is done, and the wheat stored away, and you are through worrying about the hail, or drought, or grasshoppers. So therefore, you're done worrying about it because the harvesting is done. All right. So again, if you remember the very first part, we assumed that it was either being planted or it's already been harvested, right? But in this case, I guess they harvested it. So therefore, hail, drought, and grasshoppers are one of those things that you need to worry about, right? That's what it says. So therefore, let's go back to the question now and see what the narrator has to worry about. So here, which of the following does the narrator not directly identify as a threat, right? So grasshopper, definitely. She had to worry about this because of the wheat crop, right? Wheat was eaten by grasshoppers, so definitely. Hail was one of them. Drought was one of them. But wind wasn't mentioned as one of them. So obviously the answer has to be the wind, right? Because it was not mentioned as one of those threats to the wheat crop. And so therefore, wind is the answer. But yes, she mentioned something of the wind. She says something about September is like one quiet day, right? One quiet day after a week of windy days, right? So I guess wind is somehow, right? It's somehow the real wind we're talking about, right? She said it was a real wind that blows dirt in your eyes, and so therefore windy or wind does somehow affect the wheat crop, but she doesn't directly identify that with the actual threat, right? So the actual threat would be grasshoppers, hails, and drought. The answer has to be wind, which is not directly identifies as your answer, right? Okay, let's move on to the next question. As it is used in line 30, number 9, the word fenced can reasonably be said to mean all of the following except for this one. Now, again, for whether it's coincidence or not, right? We already have read that part, the fence part of it. Well, let's go back to it. let's see what it means when you say fence it, right? I think we found it when Ellen was washing the cucumbers, right? I think so, something like that, right? So here, this is the part, because it says line 30. I washed some cucumbers while I was waiting. They were bright green and shiny in the water. I used to play they were alligators when I was a child, so when she was younger. Then I fenced them, right? I don't know, for some reason she fenced them in with my hand and poured off the water into the kettle on the stove. When you have to carry every drop of water, you use half a mile. You don't throw away any. So which means is that she was washing the cucumbers, and when she was a child, she used to pretend that the cucumbers are alligators, right? So here she says, then I fenced them. So she fenced them as in she, you know how to fence it, right? She fenced them, and then she would pour down the water into the kettle, because she says that water was so scarce that she, if you have to walk a half a mile to get water, every drop of water counts. And so she has to fence, I think you have done this, right? So, you usually do this with noodles. So you cook noodles, right? And you have to drain water, right? So you have to run the noodle into the sift, right? And then the water runs up, and then you would get your noodle free of water. So that's what she's doing. She fenced it, and she was running the water down to the kettle, and then she would have the cucumbers only. So what does that mean by fence, right? So fence means to block, right? That's the idea, to block. So let's move on to the question and see if there's the idea of the block. So there's the word shut, there's the word penned, there's the word committed, and there was word held, right? So obviously the answer has to be committed, because committed has got nothing to do with blocking, right? You don't commit water into cattle, right? So definitely not. All right, so definitely the answer has to be committed, right? Last question, number 10. When the narrator's dad tells her that he has decided to sell the crop, current crop of wheat, the narrator reacts to the news with a feeling of excitement. So she's probably excited about this thing, right? About selling of the crop, because it means that she could go to university, right? This fall. So obviously she's excited. So how does she react to the news, right? Or how does she, or with the feeling of excitement, how does she react to the news? Does she try to hide it from him, consume her, or is it paired with discontent, or is it tinged with guilt, right? That's what we want to see. We know particular part of that passage where this is mentioned, right? So we'll go back to that passage and see what it means, all right? So let's go back. So if we go back to the almost last paragraph, or somewhere close to the last paragraph, you'll probably see that idea, right? So here we go. So let's just go over here. From here, we'll just read it from here. So let's erase that and see if we could get that off, right? So here we go. Let's just erase all, and then let's see. So Dad clicked off the radio and came out to the kitchen. Of course, well, we'll go over and to tell Bailey's that we're going to sell. 53 is good enough. Come on, Ellen, you can drive me over. I took my apron off, right? I took off my apron and was running across to the barn for the pickup before Dad had taken his hat from behind the door. I felt so excited, I couldn't walk soberly, right? So she walked like she was drunk. Glory, it was hot. So here, it just shows you that the inside the pickup truck, it was so hot that I had the doors of the truck tied open with a piece of rope so that the air could rush through, but it felt hot enough to scorch my bare ankles, and the heat of the engine came up through the rubber soles of my sneakers. So therefore, the pickup truck was really hot, and that hotness would probably tell us how excited she was, right? So here, I felt so excited that she could not walk soberly. Let's move on. So how does she express her excitement, right? So she tries to hide it from him? I don't think so, because she's not even walking properly. She's walking not soberly, so she's walking drunk almost, right? So therefore, no. Does it consume her? Consuming mean it consumes her, so she's so excited that she can't do anything, right? She's so excited that this is shown through her every actions. That could possibility, or there's a good possibility that that's the answer. Is paired with discontent. Is she discontented? Is she somehow disappointed? No. Is tinged with guilt. I don't think you can see any guilt in her, because she was so excited she could not walk soberly. So therefore, the answer will have to be, it consumed her, right? It consumes her. The excitement consumes her, so she can't even walk properly. So that's the idea, right? Okay. So as you can see here, you're able to answer all of the questions with only the parts that we have to read. If you look back into the passage, let's take a look into the passage and see. All right. So I mean, remember how we were all, like underlining everything that we read, right? So here, of course, in the first paragraph, we had to read a bunch of it because we had to read the first paragraph, first sentence, the last sentence, and the sentence that's within, right? Because that was the grasshopper, hail, and drought, right? But at the second paragraph, we only had to read this and only had to read that part, right? And also, third paragraph, the first line only, this line only, and this one somehow we had to read it all because of the fence part of it, and because not just the fence part of it, but because of the water part of it, right? So here it says when you have to walk. So this was entirely read. This paragraph or the fifth paragraph, you only had to read the first sentence and then Gotham there, and then we had to read a little bit of Gotham to find out that there was nothing about the land disputes in Gotham, right? And then the last sentence here, and then one sentence here, that's one just full sentence anyways, one sentence there, and then one sentence there, one sentence there, one sentence here, and last sentence there. And that was pretty much it. The first sentence, and then probably we read this part anyways, right? So if you read it, if you look at it carefully, so out of 100% of all the passages, we have only read about 60%. And that could have saved you a lot of time in answering the questions, right? I mean, you realize that some of these parts are non-essential or non-necessary, right? It's unnecessary to read those parts. All right. So again, that's the prose fiction. Of course, towards the end of our lectures, all the lectures, we are going to tackle some of those prose fictions that are hard. Some of those prose fictions that you will need to somehow, connect the dots better than you would connect the dots here. All right. So we'll try that in the future, in the lectures, the futures to come, or the lectures to come in the future. All right. So anyways, the next meeting or the next lecture, what we're going to discuss would be the social sciences. And many of my students would tell me that they would have the most difficulty in prose fiction, and they would have the most difficulty in social sciences and human sciences or humanities. Now, just because social sciences and humanities deal with, say, current issues or issues that are socially important, and of course, it affects the humanities, and so many of them have no idea what the passage talks about. All right. So therefore, we'll take a look into the social sciences, of course, as well as the humanities later on, so that you can get a full grasp on the actual passages. All right. Of course, the last passage is natural sciences, but natural sciences seem to be quite easy. All right. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next meeting. All right. So before then, please practice and try to get in terms with the prose fiction passages, so that you don't really have to spend time reading the entire passage, but only the necessary parts of the passages to solve the questions. Thank you for watching. It's been Isaac, and I'll see you next meeting. Bye bye.